All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. One nice thing about Zoom is it does allow a lot of people to join in from all over, and I can see a lot of you from our lab, and I think some of your family, and then we've got Tom in Oregon. So really nice that we can do that. Sam has two unique features as my student. One, she's been at UW longer than me. She got both her BS and her MS degrees in SEFs. And second, she's my only student that's ever had a documentary made, and like a famous one. So those of you that don't know, I'm sure you probably all do, you can watch Wildcat on Amazon Prime. And I think that gets at probably the most important aspects of Sam's work, which is she started a nonprofit in Peru, spends, as far as I can tell, most of her time in Peru, and really just seems to love being there, being in the jungle, and really working to help save Amazonian wildcats. And I don't want to take up too much time because I think Sam has a lot to say. So I'm really excited to see Sam have her defense today, and I hope that you'll all enjoy it because I think it's going to be great.
All right, I'm gonna share my screen. Portion of screen. All right, can everyone see that? Yeah, awesome.
Yep, that looks great.
Okay, cool. I'm still getting used to Zoom sometimes, so I've minimized people. That part's important. All right. All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome to the first part of my dissertation defense. For those of you who don't know, my name is Sam Zwicker, and I'm a PhD candidate in Dr. Beth Gardner's Quantitative Ecology Lab in the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences at the University of Washington. From a young age, I've always been very passionate about wildlife, which translated into a career in tropical wildlife research, applied conservation, and the rewilding of threatened species. I never really expected to come to Peru keen on studying elusive felids and then staying forever, but here I am. I also never expected to do a PhD with a focus on statistics. While I remain more of an ecologist than a statistician, I know that the skills that I've developed within the Quantitative Ecology Lab and with Beth will help make my future research and conservation projects more informed and more impactful. It also feels a little strange to condense years of work into a 45-minute presentation, but I'm going to do my best. And although my work extends far beyond just felids or cats, the title of my dissertation is Elusive Felids of Lowland Amazonia, assessing the effects of human disturbance across an unprotected landscape. So to support the transitions between my three chapters and to not repeat information, I will first provide an overall introduction to my study region, the human activities present within this region and within my subsequent study areas, the focal species, the methodology of using camera traps to collect data, and a deeper dive into the covariates that I've chosen to use in various models. Then I will move into chapters 1, 2, and 3. I will end with some overall conclusions about my research thus far. After, there will be time for questions if you have any. I'd also like to mention that as I delve into the specific chapters, which have become individual papers for publication, I will start saying we a lot more than I. This work was a collective effort between my whole team here at Hoja Nueva with my co-author, Beth, feedback from my entire doctoral committee, and my lab mates, and actually many, many more people over the years. All right, so beginning with the introduction that will help frame all three of my chapters and diving right into the study region, which is where I currently am. The southern part of the Peruvian Amazon lies within the department of Madre de Dios, one of the largest unprotected and intact tropical rainforests in Peru, which has the second largest extent of rainforest in the Amazon and still consists largely of contiguous forest. Madre de Dios contains 4 national protected areas of over 1 million hectares each, including Manu National Park, Alto Purus National Park, Madre de Dios Territorial Reserve, and the Tempopata Bawajasoneni National Reserve, as well as several large indigenous reserves, conservation concessions throughout, and private protected lands. The region is known for its diversity and abundance of fauna. However, it is also a mosaic of concessions with registered activities that often do not reflect actual land use and continues to face increasing pressures of logging and clear-cut agriculture. The study was carried out at the Hoja Nueva Research Center along the Las Piedras River, and this is about 70 kilometers north of Puerto Maldonado, the capital. So at a continental level, the Amazon rainforest is being converted to modified landscapes through activities including mining, oil drilling, slash and burn agriculture, selective and clear-cut timber extraction, and urbanization. These activities destroy swaths of forest, converting them into landscapes which often become nutrient poor and polluted, while leaving the remaining habitat severely fragmented and exposed to edge effects. As the forest is destroyed or degraded, ecosystem processes are disrupted or lost, resources become sparse, habitat becomes unsuitable, and wildlife populations decline. Even in areas of standing forest, defaunation is occurring due to indirect factors such as selective resource extraction, as well as direct threats like bushmeat hunting and wildlife trafficking. In the Las Piedras region specifically, the most prevalent threats are the expansion of agriculture and remote communities, also selective timber extraction and bushmeat hunting. The main driver of deforestation is agricultural clearings for cacao and papaya, which create inhospitable habitats while negatively impacting the surrounding forests. Timber extraction focusing on hardwood trees has altered the habitat composition by removing keystone species that serve many critical functions. As human populations have expanded, bushmeat hunting has also increased significantly and is directly impacting many species. Although the Las Piedras remains an area of high overall ecosystem health, it is faced with anthropogenic pressures that are increasing in both prevalence and severity, a situation that is playing out across many different areas in the Amazon. So my research has focused on 5 felid species and 12 prey species, many of which are either data deficient or threatened with extinction locally in Peru or globally. The 5 sympatric felid species in our region include the jaguar, the puma, the ocelot, the jaguarundi, and the margay. The 12 terrestrial prey species included in the first chapter of my dissertation include the lowland tapir, the giant armadillo, the giant anteater, white-lipped peccary, rocket deer, collared peccary, small armadillos, the paca, agouti, common opossum, green acuchi, and the Brazilian rabbit. Despite their critical ecological roles, from apex predators to seed dispersers and predators, 6 of these species are listed as near threatened or vulnerable, and 11 are either data deficient or unlisted by either the IUCN or the Peruvian Red List of threatened species. I had a lot of objectives throughout this research, but my primary objectives were to examine how multifarious human activities are affecting mammal populations in Madre de Dios, Peru, and to provide a robust synthesis of species occupancy, spatiotemporal patterns, and density to local stakeholders, with a focus on those that are data deficient and or threatened. So camera trapping is an effective method for wildlife research due to its non-intrusive nature, enabling observations without disturbing natural behaviors. It is particularly valuable for studying elusive species, offering continuous data collection and insights into their habits in remote or challenging environments, like here. I chose camera trapping as a method for collecting data on the 17 different mammal species here in Las Piedras. The forest study areas included approximately 450 square kilometers of lowland rainforest, representative of diverse land cover and land use. One of the 4 study areas surveyed consistently in this map is Area A, the Las Piedras Conservation Corridor, in the years 2018, 19, 21, and twice in 2022. The 3 remaining study areas were unprotected and included a variety of human disturbances. They included a network of logging roads between the Interoceanic Highway and the Las Piedras River, Area B, a remote indigenous settlement of subsistence hunters, Area C, and lastly, a cacao agricultural association south of the conservation corridor, Area D. All areas were sampled for approximately 90 days in the dry or the dry-wet transition season. The 2 macro habitat types that were surveyed included terra firma, also upland forest, and floodplain forest. The latter is forest that is seasonally inundated during the wet season. A grid was overlaid for each sample grid, and cameras were placed on human trails or roads when one could be found within 100 meters of a grid point. This was to maximize captures of most of our focal species, especially the felids. Wildlife trails were also used at grid points if a road or trail could not be found. Throughout the study, 153 camera stations were placed on human trails or roads, 140 were placed on wildlife trails, for a total of 293 stations. We used Browning Strike Force trail cameras, which trigger with movement at 20 meters with an open view. Camera stations were made up of 1 or 2 cameras placed facing a trail, road, or wildlife trail, facing each other, approximately 40 to 50 centimeters off the ground, set to capture videos. So throughout my research, it was important to investigate the effects of both bottom-up ecological variables, landscape variables, and human disturbance on population dynamics. To do so, a variety of covariates were created and organized using data collected in the field or from imagery. These covariates included macrohabitat, which is floodplain or terra firma forest, as I mentioned. Here, floodplain forest is represented in blue and upland forest in orange. Next is enhanced vegetation index, which is also known as greenness. Distance from the Las Piedras River. Indices representing large prey availability and small prey availability. Distance from the nearest settlement. Proximity to agriculture. And land use. The indices of large and small prey were specifically used as proxies for prey availability and habitat quality, and were considered when running models with felids only. Additionally, anthropogenic covariates are useful in estimating the level of accessibility that hunters might have to these survey areas or stations. All right, so moving on to the individual chapters now. Chapter 1, moderate levels of human disturbance impact persecuted mammals in the Peruvian Amazon rainforest. The Amazon rainforest, as I mentioned, is undergoing rapid changes due to activities such as resource extraction and urban expansion. These changes are influenced by a complex interplay of factors, including both local and international economic influences, the development of civil infrastructure like highways and bridges that provide access to previously untouchable areas, and the adoption of mechanized agriculture and extraction techniques. Although it's widely recognized that habitat loss through deforestation is a significant ecological consequence of land conversion, another significant yet less studied consequence is defaunation. Defaunation is the process of wildlife population declines, particularly in modified areas and adjacent intact forest. Bushmeat hunting, retaliation killing, and wildlife trafficking are direct targeted drivers of defaunation that have often heavy impacts on specific species. Indirect drivers include prey depletion and increased interspecific competition due to resource pool modification. Defaunation can have widespread trophic impacts by altering not only the dynamics between species, but also things like plant-animal interactions that are key to ecosystem stability. Because of the systematic nature of land conversion, defaunation often begins occurring in seemingly intact forests before widespread deforestation is apparent and can often go unnoticed. The species most impacted by the direct drivers of defaunation could be considered the most persecuted species, and therefore could serve as valuable indicator species for the process of defaunation and overall ecosystem health. So our main objective was to assess the impacts of human disturbances on 17 mammal species spanning both predator and prey guilds. Our hypothesis was that the most persecuted species would be most negatively affected by human disturbance. Of the felids, the 2 that are the most common in the pet trade, either killed for their fur or retaliation for livestock kills, for example, include the jaguar and the ocelot. Of the prey guild, the most commonly persecuted game species include the lowland tapir, the brocket deer, white-lipped peccary, collared peccary, paca, and the agouti. Of the total 17 mammal species in this study, we expected that these 8 would be most affected by human disturbances and that the remaining 9 species would be less affected. So, methods. The first step when using camera trap data is to record all captures. And for this study, that meant going through almost 100,000 videos to detect our focal species. In order to produce more robust associations between our diverse covariates and mammal presence, we combined data from all 8 grids. We fit our data using single species, single season occupancy models. Occupancy modeling is used for many things, like calculating the fraction of an area occupied for a particular species, modeling species distributions, or rates of change in detection and occupancy in a community. We used occupancy models to explore habitat associations, or to look at aspects of land cover and land use, and how these variables affect whether a species occupies a site or not. Occupancy models have been a valuable resource in wildlife research to improve inference by accounting for false absences. Their hierarchical structure allows us to tease apart the observation process from the true occurrence state and examine variation in both detection and occupancy using covariates. To effectively answer my research questions, we fit global models that varied for predators and for prey, and also varied by the number of captures per species that we ended up getting. Most of these models had between 8 to 10 covariates on occupancy, and we fit all possible combinations from each global model. The top model was selected based on the lowest AIC value, and results were presented from that model for each species. So we had a total of 14,849 detections of our 17 mammal species. Distance from the river, land use type, and macrohabitat were the most frequent covariates amongst the top models. We found substantial support for our prediction that the most persecuted species would respond to anthropogenic pressures. 5 of the 8 species expected to be most sensitive to human disturbance experienced significant changes in occupancy probability in response to a covariate that reflected either direct or indirect human impact, including the jaguar, lowland tapir, rocket deer, collared peccary, and agouti. Additionally, white-lipped peccary were completely absent from the 7-year study, or for 7 years of the 8-year study. So jaguars and ocelots had proximity to agriculture in their top models, supporting our prediction that they would have a more heightened response to human disturbance than pumas, jaguarundis, and margays. The occupancy probability of tapirs also decreased at sites within 500 meters of agriculture. And both rocket deer and collared peccary decreased in mixed-use areas outside of the protected conservation corridor. The occupancy probability of the following 5 species were positively correlated with the river, including puma, giant anteater, collared peccary, smaller armadillos, the common opossum, and the Brazilian rabbit. Lastly, increased greenness, or EVI, had a significant positive effect on the occupancy probability of margays, lowland tapirs, and giant anteaters. All right, so our study provided valuable insights into the interplay of ecological and anthropogenic factors within a community of felid predators and their prey in the Amazon rainforest. Notably, the responses to human impacts were most pronounced in the highly persecuted mammals, both predators and game species. Among the sought-after bushmeat species, which are agouti, collared peccary, rocket deer, and lowland tapir, exhibited significant responses to anthropogenic covariates. Agoutis are known for their adaptability, but they exhibited a negative response to settlements, which is likely due to hunting pressures. Tapir's response to agriculture was likely multifaceted, likely involving hunting, food scarcity, and limited water access in these areas. Jaguars, with their larger home ranges and need for contiguous habitats, demonstrated vulnerability to the threats posed by the Surveyed Agricultural Association, possibly due to both prey scarcity and the potential for livestock retaliation by humans. The proximity to the Las Piedras River emerged as a significant predictor of mammal occupancy in this study, reflecting the importance of riverine habitats for these species. Although essential for wildlife, riverine areas are also targeted for human colonization and agriculture. Our findings underscored the need to prioritize protection of riverine concessions against further land use and land cover change due to their significance for mammal habitat as remote rainforest becomes further colonized. The urgency of addressing deforestation and defaunation in this landscape is highlighted in this research, as even moderate impacts from humans can lead to species loss and ecological degradation. Protected areas, particularly those integrated with human communities, can serve as vital refuge for habitat loss and hunting. By identifying persecuted species and understanding their responses to human pressures, targeted conservation interventions can ensure the persistence of critical rainforest ecosystems globally. Breath. So moving on to chapter 2, spatiotemporal partitioning of 5 sympatric felids is determined by fine-scale habitat differences and human activities in lowland Amazonia. Carnivores play critical roles in ecosystem stability and have far-reaching trophic effects on the environments they inhabit. In the Amazon rainforest, the most prevalent carnivores are the 5 species of felids living in symmetry, likely facilitated by the high resource heterogeneity in the neotropics in general. The interspecific interactions within this felid guild are poorly understood, yet are critical to facilitating effective coexistence through competition, niche partitioning, and overall guild composition. Human activities such as land conversion and hunting create changes in resource availability through habitat modification and prey depletion. Due to the trophic importance of the felid guild, these anthropogenic effects are likely to have widespread impacts on the ecosystem as a whole. Size differences between sympatric neotropical felids can impact their relative niches, and felid size helped inform this study. This figure shows an approximate size comparison between the 5 cats in our system, from the largest cat, the jaguar, to the smallest, the margay. We can use size comparisons to estimate the intensity of interguild predation and food competition between felids, or at least make predictions about it. When we consider factors such as size differences, habitat, and prey availability, as well as human impact, we gain invaluable insights into the mechanisms that allow felids to coexist. Our main objective of this chapter was to use ecological and anthropogenic predictors to tease apart the multifaceted interactions between 5 felids to inform conservation methods in human-modified landscapes. We had multiple hypotheses. I included a couple here. One was that conditional occupancy models would best describe the spatial interactions in dominant and subordinate felids that are more similar in size. Another was that the smaller felids would both respond behaviorally to risk and evade direct lethal encounters with larger predators by using a combination of spatial and temporal avoidance. We used the same camera trap dataset from chapter 1 and similar covariates to examine the impacts of human disturbances on the co-occurrence patterns of 10 felid pairs. To do so, we employed what are called conditional or 2-species single-season occupancy models. In other words, we assessed the occupancy of subordinate felids in response to the presence or absence of a larger dominant felid, while incorporating a variety of covariates to test for correlations in their co-occurrence. We ran 10 models per species pair, including initial null and interaction models, followed by 8 more complex models with covariates on detection, occupancy, and interaction. Human covariates included proximity to agriculture, distance from settlements, land use type, and temporal human activity. Ecological covariates included EVI or greenness, macrohabitat, distance from the river, and the large prey index. The top model per species pair was selected based on the lowest AIC value. We then assessed felid activity patterns and temporal overlap between felids by using time and date data from the camera trap imagery. We used kernel density functions to estimate coefficients of overlap per species pair, where overlap could vary from 0, which is no overlap, to 1, which is complete overlap. We then compared these estimates at sites with low versus high human activity across all of our camera stations. Confidence intervals then gauge the significance between overlap means and low and high human activity areas per species pair. So the conditional occupancy results first. Distance from river emerged as a significant covariate predicting co-occurrence in 5 top models, followed by the prey index and the enhanced vegetation index, which were both present in 3 top models. Distance from settlement and human activity each appeared in 1 top model. I don't have the time to delve into the results of all 10 felid pairs, so I wanted to focus on the 3 larger cats. I have models here. Ocelot occupancy increased at sites where jaguars were absent and increased closer to the river when jaguars were present. Interestingly, the same patterns of interaction characterize the relationship between pumas and ocelots, but ocelot response to puma presence or absence was actually more intense. When pumas were present, ocelot occupancy increased closer to the river and in floodplain forest, as opposed to terra firma or upland forest. The best fit model explaining interactions between jaguar and puma included the distance from settlement covariate, where puma site use increased closer to settlements when jaguars were present. Moving on to the temporal results. This figure provides detailed felid activity patterns based on our camera trap data. You can see that the jaguarundi is the only predominantly diurnal felid and therefore has low overlap with the other felids. Now, regarding felid overlap between areas of low and high human activity either increased temporal segregation in felid dyads or had no effect. Interestingly, of the significant relationships where temporal partitioning increased, the subordinate felids were either jaguarundis or margays, our 2 smallest cats in this system. One of the more apparent examples of increased temporal partitioning in areas of high human activity was actually between pumas and margays. They had an overlap of almost 92% in areas of low human activity, which decreased to 74% in areas of high human activity. I found this result interesting because one of the few spatial relationships observed between margays and any of the larger felids was also with pumas, where the margays increased in occupancy probability in areas of upland forest when pumas were absent. All right, so supporting our hypotheses, spatial models significantly described dyad interactions or pair interactions where the felids were similar in size. We also confirmed that subordinate felids use a combination of spatial and temporal avoidance to decrease encounters and dominant felids. Conditional occupancy results showed that the combination of jaguar presence and distance from settlements were significant in predicting the occupancy of pumas, which could be caused by several factors. Pumas are known to be more adaptable to fragmented habitats than jaguars and may be more likely to use smaller patches of suitable habitat closer to human settlements to tolerate human presence and activities a little bit better than jaguars do. Human activities such as hunting or habitat modification near settlements may create more favorable conditions for pumas to occur when coexisting with the larger jaguar. These results suggest that jaguars and pumas have complex competitive relationships that are influenced by human activities and the spatial distribution of settlements, which could benefit from further research in more modified areas and in areas with larger settlements. The spatiotemporal results for jaguar ocelot and puma ocelot demonstrate the importance of spatial and dietary partitioning in limiting competition, and specifically the river as a landscape feature that shapes their spatial interactions. This has important conservation implications, again, given that riverine habitat is the first to be colonized by humans for agriculture and settlements. Rivers are also used as access points to the jungle for subsistence hunting. Given their need for space to limit competition and their ecological roles in the community, conservation efforts should focus on preserving riverine habitat and protecting large intact forest habitat to maintain the species interactions and ecosystem stability in this biodiverse ecosystem. Our temporal overlap results support the findings of more recently published works demonstrating that smaller mesocarnivores are shifting their temporal activity in response to human activities. Margays decreased their activity during the day, and even jaguarundis appeared more crepuscular, while the larger cats showed less of a response. While it appears that human activity might be facilitating coexistence in some of these pairs, especially with the subordinate small felids, this wasn't always the case for the jaguarundi. Since jaguarundi and human activity patterns naturally overlap given their diurnal patterns, this should be of conservation concern, or at least further study in areas of human disturbance, because greater shifts would increase encounters between the jaguarundi and their larger felid predators. All right, it's the last chapter, bear with me, I'm sweating. And this one is not a multi-species chapter, it just focuses on one of my favorite animals, which is the ocelot. And it's called Adaptation of Realized Niche by Ocelots in Response to Moderate Levels of Human Impact in Madre de Dios, Peru. So the Amazon rainforest, renowned for its remarkable biodiversity, faces dire threats due to human-induced habitat loss and fragmentation from activities like logging and agriculture. This poses significant challenges for carnivores, including declining populations, genetic diversity, and ecosystem disruptions. Carnivores playing vital roles in ecosystem balance by regulating prey and influencing community dynamics are impacted, which in turn affects mesocarnivores and prey species. The Amazon's mesocarnivores, like the ocelot, hold crucial positions in ecosystem functions, impacting predator-prey interactions and seed dispersal. Ocelots are widely distributed from the USA all the way to Argentina. They're a key generalist predator, maintaining ecological stability across their range. And while they adapt to some human activity, intact forests remain their preference. As human expansion fragments their habitat across their range, understanding the effects of ecological and human factors on ocelot density, behavior, and activity patterns is critical. So this study aimed to estimate ocelot activity density, home range, and sex ratios in the Amazon's Las Piedras region using camera traps across a mixed use and protected area. We hypothesized that ocelots would adapt their realized niche temporally before adapting their spatial patterns, given the response of other similar mesocarnivores like the leopard cat or the guinea in their respective systems. We predicted that ocelots would therefore be more nocturnal, or at least avoid times of concentrated human activity in the mixed use area where humans were detected more frequently and in higher numbers. We didn't expect to see as much of a significant difference between ocelot density between the bordering study areas, and I'll explain that later. This particular study focused in on one of the larger camera trap grids from 2021. The study area covered 174 kilometers squared and consisted of both a protected area here in green and a mixed use area in orange. The protected area included concessions for non-timber forest products, conservation, and ecotourism, with limited human activities focused more on academic tourism, forest patrols, and non-invasive wildlife research. The mixed use area contained cacao and papaya farms, seasonal logging networks, and patches of native forest. We placed 50 camera stations spaced 1 kilometer apart to maximize ocelot captures, even females. Cameras were positioned about 40 centimeters off the ground, staggered on opposite sides of the trails, pointing each other, primarily human trails and roads, like logging roads, but also on wildlife trails. Ocelots were identified by their unique coat patterns captured by paired cameras since all spotted cats are individually identifiable. We used a software package called Hotspotter to help organize ocelot footage and to select regions of interest, what are also called ROIs, for comparison. One researcher identified the ocelots, and a second one went and verified the identifications. Individuals were sexed using the presence or absence of the scrotum in these photos. Spatial capture-recapture models were employed to assess density differences between the protected area and the mixed-use area and obtain estimates of detection, spatial scale parameters, home ranges, and sex ratios for males and females. Seeker models take into account the spatial distribution of individuals and their detection probabilities based on the distances between individuals and detectors, in our case, camera traps. They have both state and observation models. The state model essentially describes how individual locations or activity centers are distributed across a landscape. The observation model is also known as an encounter probability model that describes the process of capturing individuals and traps based on their distances from the traps and the associated detection probabilities involved. We use what's called a habitat mask to separate the state space into two regions, the protected area and the mixed use area that you saw on the earlier map. We tested 4 models, all with region on density, a combination of trail type and or sex on detection probability, and the effect of sex or no sex on the spatial scale parameter estimates. A Poisson observation model and hazard half-normal detection function were used to account for multiple captures per occasion. We calculated density separately for each area and then actually used a weighted average across both areas to get an overall density estimate. Home ranges for both males and females were estimated using circular probability and their calculated spatial scale parameters. For our temporal analysis, we use the same methods from chapter 2 to calculate overlap coefficients and compare ocelot activity between the protected area and the mixed use area, as well as the overlap between ocelot activity and human activity, and how these estimates compared between the two areas. Moving into the results from Seeker, the spatial side of things. Out of the 293 photo captures of ocelots, we identified 272 photos to the individual. The remaining 21 were either too blurry or only partially captured a passing individual. A total of 39 individual ocelots were identified during the survey, including 21 females and 18 males. 18 individual ocelots were captured in the mixed-use area and 21 individuals were captured in the protected area. Based on AIC, the top model included region on density, sex on movement, and both sex and trail type on detection. Density averaged across the state space was about 32 ocelots per 100 square kilometers, and there was no significant difference in density based on the confidence intervals between the protected area and the mixed use area. Baseline detection rates increased for both males and females when on a trail. The estimated spatial parameter was 954 meters for males and 466 meters for females, leading to home ranges of about 17 and 4 kilometers squared, respectively. The overall sex ratio was 0.46 to 0.54 males, females. So we found evidence to support our hypothesis that ocelots alter their temporal activity patterns more in the mixed use area. Results from the kernel density functions of ocelot activity revealed shifts in temporal patterns between the private protected area and the mixed use land area with an overlap of 0.85. As you can see in this figure, peaks of activity in the protected area were at 3 a.m. and 7 p.m. with some diurnal activity between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. In the mixed use area, ocelots became most active between 9 p.m. and 4 a.m., and they decreased in activity between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. to almost 0. Additionally, the overlap of ocelot and human activity was significantly higher in the protected area, about 0.27, than in the mixed use area, 0.2, supporting our predictions. In this figure, you can see how ocelots in the mixed use area adjusted their activity in relation to human temporal activity, which was concentrated around 1 p.m. Our analyses supported our hypothesis that ocelots have temporally adapted their realized niche in response to human disturbance across our study area. To our knowledge, only one study has compared ocelot activity across a human impact gradient, finding no significant effects on ocelot activity in areas of oil drilling in northern Peru. Our results suggest that in matrix habitat, ocelots are adapting their realized niche by decreasing their diurnal activity to facilitate spatial coexistence and temporal coexistence with humans in these more disturbed areas. The consequence of these shifts, especially by an ecologically influential mesocarnivore like the ocelot, extend beyond species fitness and population persistence. With increased human pressures globally, species-specific shifts to greater nocturnality could have adverse effects on entire ecological communities, such as behavioral release in smaller mesocarnivores, changes in predator-prey dynamics, or decline in seed dispersers. Frozen. Ocelot density showed no significant difference between the protected area of primary rainforest and the mixed-use area of matrix habitat. The mixed-use land area, despite facing seasonal deforestation, agricultural activities, selective logging, and hunting, remained relatively intact, contributing to these results. Our study did not include areas of the highest human disturbance as well. Instead, we focused more on the moderately disturbed areas near farms or logging, but not actually within them. Thus, it seems likely that the ocelot density may vary more along a gradient of human disturbance than just by a binary term that we were able to include in this analysis. Sampling more heavily impacted areas and determining more refined measures of human impact would also allow for more patterns to be explored in future studies. The success of ocelot persistence in mixed-use areas is likely to be contingent on several factors, namely the quality and size of remaining intact forest and the distance to a protected area or corridor. Severe habitat degradation, hunting of prey, and retaliation for livestock kills will further reduce their ability to persist in matrix habitat. Conservation efforts that focus on protecting and restoring habitat quality and connectivity in matrix habitats may be crucial for the persistence of ocelots in these landscapes. Our results provide valuable insight into the ocelot demographics along the front lines of habitat conservation and conversion here in Western Amazonia, a critical area in the ongoing conservation needs of this species. This is a little ocelot water break. Got to throw a couple in there. All right, so conclusions to all three chapters. The findings from these studies underscore the intricate dynamics between ecological factors, human impacts, and wildlife in the rainforest of Las Piedras. Notably, the responses of both predators and prey to anthropogenic pressures reveal the vulnerability of highly persecuted mammals. Among sought-after bushmeat species, agoutis, collared peccaries, brocket deer, and lowland tapirs exhibited substantial reactions to human-induced changes. This emphasizes the adaptability of certain species while highlighting the effects of hunting and habitat alteration on others. Jaguar sensitivity to agriculture highlights the need for contiguous habitats to support their large home ranges and prey availability. Riverine habitats emerge as vital predictors of mammal occupancy, accentuating the importance of conserving these areas amid escalating colonization and agriculture. The coexistence strategies of felid predators further elucidate the role of spatial and temporal partitioning, particularly evident in the dyadic interactions between subordinate species and their avoidance mechanisms with dominant species. Human activities, settlements, and landscape features, like rivers, intricately shape these interactions, underscoring the complexity of competition dynamics. These findings stress the significance of protecting riverine habitats, maintaining intact forests, and understanding human-wildlife interactions for effective conservation. Ocelot's temporal adaptations in response to human disturbances unveil broader implications as activity shifts to humans could have cascading effects on community structure. Ocelot's persistence in mixed-use areas underscores the importance of intact forest quality and proximity to protected areas. Conservation efforts must prioritize habitat quality, connectivity, and address direct threats like hunting and habitat degradation. Collectively, these studies highlight the urgency of mitigating deforestation, habitat loss, and human-induced pressures in the Amazon rainforest. Prioritizing protected areas and fostering coexistence between wildlife and human communities are crucial strategies. Targeted interventions informed by species-specific responses to anthropogenic factors can play a pivotal role in safeguarding the intricate web of life here in the Amazon rainforest and its global significance. I added this in at the last minute. It's a string of videos to show, let me see, an example of the diversity of fauna in riverine systems. This camera trap station was approximately 50 meters from the river, and this is in our protected area here at Hoja Nueva. Not only did it capture the majority of mammals in our system as a whole, it captured some of the most highly persecuted as well as the most elusive species in Las Piedras, including the bush dogs that you just saw pass by there. And this was all on one single camera trap that was actually put up in 2023 this year. To show off the footage. Right. We made it. I'm going to straight face this because I will get emotional. It's been an emotional week. So firstly, thank you to my advisor and committee chair, Beth Gardner, for accepting me into your lab when I changed programs, for bringing out the problem solver in me, and for pushing me to become the researcher that I am today. Thank you to my mom, Heidi, my siblings, Kelly and Cole. This is hard. And my fiance, Dylan, for their unwavering support in this endeavor. Dylan has essentially taken over all operations for our nonprofit here in Peru over the last year so that I could really focus on my dissertation. Without his help, I wouldn't be here today. Also, I'd like to thank the rest of my doctoral committee, Aaron, Tom, Tim, and Joseph Zunt, who have provided guidance over the years and critical feedback on my chapters. Thank you to the members of the Quantitative Ecology Lab for their encouragement and comments on earlier drafts of this manuscript and all the moral support and late night chats. Sarah and Sierra, you are examples of badass women in science and of women supporting women, so thank you. Thank you to all the members of Hoja Nueva. I can't list you all. Some of you are here, some of you aren't, but you know who you are and that this work wouldn't have been possible without your support, both personally and professionally. A special thanks to the communities here, Puerto Lucerna and Puerto Nuevo in Peru, members of the Las Piedras Conservation Corridor and the National Forest Service, or SERFOR, for their local support within country. Funding and resources for this dissertation research and its dissemination were provided by Friends of Hoja Nueva, the University of Washington Student Tech Fund, and Panthera's Small Cat Action Fund. Lastly, I'd like to collectively thank the UW's Disability Resources for Students, my doctors. I came into this experience very unsure if I would be successful, but with the support that I've received from all of you, I've been able to achieve great things. So thank you. I'm very proud and hopeful that more people will be able to be given the same support. I'd like to dedicate my dissertation. Alrighty. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. That was great. I just realized that there isn't a chat. So I'm like people putting emojis and doing the clapping, but I'm sure they'd be writing chat right now.
It's okay. I can't see anyone, but that's on purpose.
Well, great job. I admit when we saw the practice talk, it was like an hour long and you hadn't gotten to chapter 3 yet. So incredible, incredible job restructuring this. It was really good. Loved the way that you really incorporated the pictures and the location to really make the story better. So really good job. I'm looking to see if anybody has questions. There is like a Q&A tab I see on there, but also you can just unmute and ask questions if you'd like to. And I'll give folks a second. You can also, okay, I got one in the Q&A. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll start with this one from Steve. Given the inevitable ongoing settlement activity and the increasing human-wildlife overlap, what are examples of practical mitigation strategies that communities can or should take to reduce the impact of these highlighted temporal and spatial changes in the species that you have researched? Great question.
It's a loaded question, Steve. Yeah, so I think it really takes multifaceted conservation efforts, kind of like what we do on the ground here. So addressing some of those direct challenges at the same time as the indirect. So in remote communities, one of the main things is that they need a lot of support. A lot of these kind of land invasions that I mentioned are communities that are setting up because they're either fleeing civil conflict or something happened with where they came from. And so they come to the jungle because it's technically free land, but these communities form and they don't get any support from the government, from healthcare to support with food, and definitely not things that are vital to human health, like water access, waste management, those types of things. So I think on a core level, addressing education in remote communities, but at the same time providing alternative income opportunities, helping people to especially people who come from different areas, to understand these environments, understand the species and the animals is very key. It's kind of all interrelated, but that can really help with fostering better coexistence with wildlife. And I mean, there's so many to address, but one of the ones that's worked across the globe and that works here is also doing like retaliation kills, like providing or replacing livestock that have been killed by cats so that they're not poached. I put a couple photos in the beginning of ocelots specifically, and those are all from our actual agricultural association, people leaving out, poison for ocelots, which of course affects more than just that single ocelot. So it's really just, education and providing people other opportunities to coexist. Sorry, I probably could have narrowed that in more, but.
No, great job. Okay, one more in the chat here. What would you say is the most novel finding of your research compared to other studies, particularly thinking about felid ecology and conservation?
Yeah, so I think one of the things, and I might be biased on this, but I was really excited across the different chapters to be able to get any response at all for jaguarundis. They're data deficient. There's basically like nothing about them in most systems, but especially in like dense lowland rainforest environments. So in the first chapter, I didn't mention it because I didn't have time, but to be able to get a response of both small prey and large prey, indicating a little bit about like what they are actually eating here, but more importantly, habitat quality was really, just like informative. And then in the second chapter, which is kind of like looking at the two species occupancy models and their relationship with the larger predators, it was interesting to get some of those relationships that I didn't actually expect based on size differences. And like I mentioned, some of them were with the jaguarundi. So I think those were, just like most exciting to be able to almost like, discover something that people haven't been able to really describe effectively beyond theory, and be able to support information data regarding a species that doesn't, that's data deficient. That's one.
Great. I'll see if we have any other questions. Would anybody like to unmute and ask one? And I'll give you a second to do that.
Don't be shy.
I'll ask sort of a follow-up on the one you just got, which is, what do you now see as like the most important next step?
That's a great question. I think when you go through all of these, and especially like going through all of these models, you kind of realize like what like worked and what you can actually like see from the data. And I think that there's just so much more that can be like teased out. I'm really interested, obviously, in the interactions and coexistence between felids, and I think that there's a lot to be investigated there. So I really want to pursue that in the future, of course, while incorporating human impacts. But that kind of gets more into like models that I would love to use in the future, but that I, don't have current experience with. So I think that's my next step.
Awesome. I want to make sure I'm not missing anybody.
Yeah.
Okay, since you have a lot.
Questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, I was interested in the patterns changing with the ocelots that you were talking about in your third chapter, and how their version of humans has led them to not be out during the daytime, and wondering if that has effect on their prey. Are they just becoming more efficient at catching their typical prey at different hours, or are they now after different prey? And will that then lead to downstream changes with other other edibles for them?
Other edibles. I think so it's definitely possible, and our results were significant. There was that significant difference there in their temporal activity between the two areas in relation to humans, but it wasn't like super apparent. Like they're not adjusting, completely to nocturnality. They were still active during the day, probably takes into account, avoiding humans more spatially during the day in those areas where I had camera traps, for example. I think in like higher disturbed systems, because like I mentioned, these were like moderate. The logging was like, happened for like maybe half of the camera grid and then didn't for the second half, that type of thing. But in areas where you get that more like high intense human activity and disturbance, I think that these results would be more pronounced, and we might even see the bigger shifts, and that probably would have a little bit more of an effect on their kind of like opportunistic killing patterns. Yeah, definitely up for further study. I didn't mention it in chapter 2, but another like aspect of niche partitioning in general is diet, and it's extremely important, especially in this environment. Want to discover how important. So there's a whole other component that involves collecting scat and doing diet research here that I will be incorporating before actually publishing that paper specifically. And I think that'll be really informative into what they're eating. I think, we've been collecting scat over the years from all different places, just opportunistically, and we'll be able to see between like different types of like mixed use versus protected area, or different types of habitats at the end, like if there's any difference in diet, which I think would better attack that question that you just had.
Thanks. And I've had a follow-up on Beth's question as well, but I also wanted to just say thanks for showing the pictures of the different animals. I was not sure what they all looked like, so that was really fun to see. But cool. The question, I mean, given your work, obviously it has lots of policy implications, and you're mentioning education. I'm wondering how your interaction with the local groups that would be responsible, whether they're policy people or people teaching, have been productive, or are you sensing any reluctance to use your research to help them hopefully improve the habitats?
Yeah, that's a great question. No reluctance. I think I plan to, and we already have kind of attacked that at 2 different scales, which is with the remote local communities on our river, and then with what is called it's CERFOR, but it's like the Mar de Dios Department of Fauna and basically forestry. And they kind of pertain more to like the concessions that I mentioned. So concessions are like how the landscape is split up, and essentially they're owned by the government, but you like rent them for 40-year periods. And it can be quite complex, and they've changed policies recently. They're not accepting people to change, for example, to a conservation concession. They're very much prioritizing timber extraction and non-timber forest products. And so that kind of shift away from conservation into concessions that are making money back for the government, even ecotourism, is obviously not something that we want to see, but conservation concessions don't make money for the government. So it's also coming up with like, what ways can we address that? Can we actually go back to maybe switching some conservation concessions and focusing them on just this riverine habitat, for example, which is something that would be a combination between the Mar de Dios department here and then in Lima, like the national CERFOR office. That's like longer scale, obviously. In terms of like working with the local communities, I think, starting small like we did, which is, really kind of getting people comfortable knowing and getting excited about the animals in their area, that type of education of what's dangerous, peligroso, what's dangerous, and how to avoid certain things, and then some of that like human wildlife conflict in whichever form it happens in those communities, and giving people that type of just like information and support is really all you can do at a local level.
Great, thanks so much, Sam.
Yeah.
Before I cut anybody else off, let's see if anybody else wants to unmute and ask anything, but we're coming right up on time, so just a second. All right, well, we have hours of questions to ask, so thanks to everybody that showed up. Thank you, Sam, great job.